The little boy said, "Sir, please take my mama." The cowboy looked at her bruises and nodded. Oklahoma Territory, late autumn, 1886. The night was cold, and the wind had teeth. In the flickering glow of lanterns and dust-choked moonlight, the sign above the saloon swung lazily, "The Mule's End." The kind of place where men drank cheap whiskey, gambled on broken tables, and forgot what dignity felt like. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the slur of drunken voices, a symphony of cards slapping wood and boots dragging floorboards. Clayton Reeve pushed through the door, his long coat trailing in behind him like a shadow that had seen too much. Dust coated his boots, and weariness clung to his eyes. All he wanted was a hot meal and a quiet corner to forget the road. He stepped inside, glanced over the room. Half a dozen rough men, one fiddler asleep on his bow, a bartender wiping glasses with a rag older than the town itself. Clayton tipped his hat back, found an empty table, and set his hat down beside him. He had not yet spoken, not yet ordered a drink, when a small figure emerged from the shadows. A boy, 6, maybe 7, barefoot, dirt-smudged, and shaking. His shirt hung off one shoulder, torn at the hem. His eyes flickered in every direction, wide with terror. Then he rushed forward and tugged at Clayton's coat. The cowboy looked down. The boy's voice was barely a whisper, broken by shallow breath. "Sir, please take my mama. He hits her like a horse, please." The saloon didn't notice, or pretended not to. Clayton leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Where's your mama, kid?" The boy opened his mouth but did not speak. His eyes darted toward the kitchen door. And then it came. A scream. Not loud, but sharp. Female. Pain-filled. A harsh whack, like leather slapping raw meat. "Please. I didn't mean to. I'll clean it. I swear." Clayton's jaw tightened. He stood. The boy clung to the back of his leg. "Mama," he choked out. Clayton stepped toward the kitchen. Another sound, flesh against wood, a low, drunken growl. He turned the corner, just in time to see her. The woman, her dress stained with spilled liquor and ash, was on her knees beside a shattered bottle. One hand up to shield her face, the other trying to hold on to the edge of the stove. Reddick, the owner of the Mule's End, stood over her, red-faced, thick-necked, and drunk, wielding the thick handle of a broomstick like a club. "You waste my stock, you get a lesson," he bellowed. Another swing. She grunted, shoulders curling in. Clayton moved. The boy darted forward. "Mama!" He barely reached her before Reddick shoved him aside with the back of his hand. The child hit the wall with a cry. That was enough. Clayton stepped between them and caught the broom mid-swing with one hand. With the other, he pushed Reddick back with a force that made the big man stumble. "That's enough," Reddick snarled. "Who the hell do you think you are, sticking your nose in my house?" Clayton's hand moved to the revolver on his hip, but he did not draw. He just let it rest there, fingers calm. His voice was steady, low. "You lay another hand on her, and I'll put you down like a mad dog." The room had gone quiet. Even the card table had frozen mid-hand. Reddick looked around. No one moved to back him. No one dared. He raised a fist, but paused when he saw Clayton's eyes. Not afraid, just ready. Slowly, he lowered his hand. The woman, Josie, looked up through a curtain of dark, tangled hair. Blood dripped from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. Someone had stopped the beating. For once. Reddick growled and dropped the broom. "You want to sleep under my roof? Fine. But come morning, you and your high-horse attitude are out of my town." Clayton said nothing. He turned to the boy, who was still sitting on the floor, tears streaming down his cheeks. The cowboy helped him to his feet, dusted off his little shoulders. Then he turned and walked back to his table. But he did not touch his food. His eyes stayed locked on the back room, where the woman and child disappeared into silence. The back kitchen of the Mule's End was dim and smelled of old grease and burned onions. A lantern flickered above the stove, casting shadows that crawled across the walls like ghosts that never left. Josie Palmer sat on a wooden stool, her back to the fire. Her dress clung to her in torn, blood-dappled patches. She pressed a damp cloth to her lip, the blood already drying. Underneath the cutting table, her son Micah curled up in a tattered blanket. His eyes blinked, slow and fearful. Even in sleep, every creak of the floor made his fingers clutch tighter at the wool. Josie leaned over and stroked his hair with trembling hands. "It's all right, baby," she whispered. "Mama's right here." In the saloon, Clayton Reeves sat alone, slowly chewing a strip of jerky. He had not ordered anything else. The whiskey here smelled like poison. His eyes followed the wavering glow of the kitchen lantern. He heard soft footsteps, dragging along the floorboards, the faint creak of a cupboard, a chair scraping gently. Then her shadow danced across the wall, the curve of her spine, the slope of her neck, the slowness of someone who had learned to move without making a sound. Clayton didn't move, but he listened. 3 years ago, Josie stood in the corner of a smoke-filled cabin, hands tied in front of her. Her father, drunk and staggering, tossed a card on the table. "That's my final bet," he slurred. Reddick, younger then, thinner but just as cruel, raised an eyebrow. "And what is that, old man?" The father grinned, revealing missing teeth. My daughter. Strong back, knows how to cook, never married. Not much of a dowry," Reddick sneered. "Take her. Settle my tab. We both win." Reddick poured himself another drink. Done. No vows, no papers, no witnesses, just half a barrel of bad whiskey and a girl no one wanted. Back in the present, Josie dabbed at a bruise blooming beneath her collarbone. She winced, then looked up, startled to find the cowboy standing in the kitchen doorway. Clayton didn't speak. He held something out, his plate. On it, a piece of dried beef and a heel of bread. She stared at it, uncertain. "Why?" He shrugged. "I'm not hungry." She hesitated, then reached for it. Their fingers brushed. Her hand trembled. "Thank you," she murmured, voice barely audible. She sat down on a crate, tore the jerky slowly, handed a piece under the table to Micah, who took it without opening his eyes. Clayton leaned against the doorway. "What's your name?" he asked. She blinked. "Josie." He nodded once. Then, for a moment, she seemed to unravel. Her lips parted, her eyes softened. "No one's asked me that in a long time," she said. He glanced at her hands, rough, scarred, at her arms lined with faded welts. Then she turned, reaching up to hang the wet rag. The back of her dress slipped, revealing a web of old lash marks, some still scabbed. Clayton did not flinch. He didn't look away. He just nodded, slow and steady. Josie froze at the gesture. Simple, wordless. But it meant more than anything said all year. He had seen. And he did not turn. He had looked at her bruises. And nodded. The sun had barely lifted over the scrub hills when Clayton stepped out of the saloon, saddlebags in hand. The cold air clung to his coat, and his boots crunched over the frost-hardened dirt. He moved with practiced calm, his face unreadable, as he handed a few coins to the stable boy and checked the saddle on his gelding. He had planned to be gone before the town truly woke. The words still echoed in his head. "Please take my mama." He tightened the strap on his saddle, jaw clenched. He had heard plenty of pleas in his life, desperate gamblers, drifters begging for coin, women crying out in alleys. He had learned to shut them out. Survive first, feel later. That was the rule. But that boy's voice had cut through something in him, something buried. Behind him, footsteps. He turned, slow. Josie stood by the stable wall, wrapped in a threadbare shawl, her eyes sunken from a sleepless night. The wind pushed strands of hair across her face, and her hands clutched the fabric, as if trying to hold herself together. "I heard you were leaving," she said quietly. Clayton didn't respond. She stepped closer, just enough that he could see the bruises hadn't faded. Her voice was low but steady. "I'm not asking you to save me." He watched her. "I just want you to take Micah." Clayton's brow twitched. She kept going, like the words had to spill, or they'd choke her. "If he stays here, with Reddick, he won't make it. Or worse, he'll become him." Clayton exhaled through his nose, glanced away. "I don't steal another man's wife." Josie laughed, soft, bitter, exhausted. "I'm not a wife. I'm a thing, a debt, a warm body that got thrown in with a card game." Her voice broke. "I'm a damn animal in a stall." Silence sat thick between them. Micah stood in the doorway of the barn, clutching a piece of wood carved into a horse. He did not speak, just watched, his small face unreadable. But his eyes, those same wide, haunted eyes, met Clayton's. Clayton looked away first. He stepped toward his horse, placed a hand on the horn of the saddle, fingers flexed. He stared down at the dirt. He remembered another time, another town, a woman screaming in the dark. He had stepped in, thought he could help, but lies had twisted truth, and he had barely escaped the lynch rope. He had sworn never again. But this boy had the same look in his eyes Clayton once saw in the mirror as a child. A look that said, "Nobody is coming." Clayton turned slowly, facing Josie again. His voice was low. "Meet me at the north edge of town, when the moon's up." Josie blinked. "Bring nothing heavy, just him, and what you can carry." Her lips trembled. She nodded once. Clayton mounted his horse and rode down the road at a steady pace. But when he reached the fork, he circled wide through the hills and watched from above, eyes on the barn. He was not riding away, not yet. The moon hung low over the rooftops of the Mule's End, a pale eye in a sky heavy with storm. The wind had picked up just past dusk, swirling dust through the empty alleyways. Most of the town had passed into the haze of drink and darkness, their movements sluggish, careless. Clayton crouched in the shadows beside the old hay barn, his coat blending into the black. He watched the back door of the saloon, silent and still, like a wolf waiting for the right gust of wind. He had spent the day tucked into the hills above town, eyes fixed on the routine of those inside. Reddick never locked the back room after dark. His men, 2 of them, always staggered to the side shed around midnight, drunk and laughing, passing the same bottle until one of them pissed himself and passed out. The fire barrel in the yard burned low after 1 a.m. No one refilled it. No one ever did. Clayton had memorized every detail. A good escape was not about speed. It was about rhythm. Now, he moved. He dragged a trail of dry hay from the back of the barn to the corner of the feed shed. From a pouch in his saddlebag, he uncorked a flask of lamp oil and soaked the straw with careful, practiced hands. He wrapped the reins of 2 horses around a post near the alley, out of sight but ready. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small match tin. He knocked twice on the rear wall of the kitchen. Light, precise, the kind of sound that could vanish in the wind, but not to the ears that waited for it. Inside, Josie flinched from her seat beside the stove. She pulled the shawl tighter around Micah's shoulders. He looked up at her with frightened eyes. She knelt, cupped his face. "It's time." She wrapped him in an old wool blanket, the kind used to line saddle packs, and scooped up the small sack she had packed with bread, water, and the carved wooden horse. She opened the back door. Clayton stood 10 feet away, lit only by the moon. She nodded. He struck the match and dropped it into the hay. It caught fast. Within seconds, the flame danced down the trail, licking greedily at the straw, then leaping into the barn's edge like it had been waiting all its life to burn. Clayton slapped the rear of the nearest horse, and it bolted, dragging the others into chaos. The sound of hooves shattered the silence, followed by a rush of smoke and the crackle of dry wood catching flame. Inside the saloon, men cursed and stumbled to their feet. Reddick's voice rang out like a gunshot. "What the hell? Fire! "Someone get water." Panic swallowed order. Barrels overturned. Ale splashed across the floor. One of the hired men tripped over a chair and slammed into the wall. Clayton seized Josie's hand. "Now." He lifted Micah onto the saddle horn, then swung Josie up behind him in one practiced motion. The horse reared once, then launched forward. They galloped behind the saloon, past the livery, and into the open plains. The wind howled louder now, like it had joined them in their escape. Dust whipped against their faces. Behind them, flames leapt higher, painting the town in flickering orange and throwing long shadows across the prairie grass. Josie clung to Clayton's back, one arm wrapped around Micah's chest. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything but the sound of their flight. Clayton urged the horse onward, choosing narrow trails between dry riverbeds and scrub trees. No lantern, no road, just instinct and stars. They did not know what waited ahead, but they knew what they had left behind. And that was enough. Night settled over the forest like a heavy blanket, muffling sound and swallowing the last streaks of firelight. The wind whispered through the pines overhead, carrying the faint, eerie howl of wolves somewhere deep in the dark. Clayton chose a clearing, sheltered by rock on one side and tall trees on the other. It was not safety, but it was distance. Distance from the saloon, from Reddick, from the life Josie had barely escaped. A small fire crackled in the center of the camp, throwing long shadows across the hard ground. The flames were weak, careful, fed only enough to keep the cold from biting too deep. Clayton did not want smoke giving them away. Micah slept in Josie's arms, his face tucked into the crook of her elbow, the wool blanket wrapped around him like a cocoon. Every few breaths, he muttered in his sleep, clutching her dress as if convinced she would disappear the moment he let go. Clayton sat across from them, elbows on his knees, watching the fire reflect in the boy's fragile features. Across from him, Josie held her son close, as though afraid the forest would snatch him into the darkness if she relaxed even a moment. Neither spoke. The night pressed in around them, and the silence felt heavier than the woods themselves. Finally, Josie lifted her gaze. Her voice came soft, almost lost beneath the rustle of leaves. "I tried to end it once," she said. Clayton looked up. "Twice," she added, voice trembling. "No, 3 times." He didn't interrupt. He didn't shift. He simply listened. Josie looked down at Micah's sleeping face. "The first time, he was just a baby. I held him and a knife at the same time. I thought it would be kinder for him not to grow up in that place, not to watch what Reddick did to me." Her breath hitched. "But he opened his eyes and looked right at me. I could not do it." Clayton's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "The second time, I tried to run into the river behind the saloon. I did not swim. I thought it would carry me away." She paused, swallowed hard. "Reddick pulled me out himself, and he beat me so badly I could not stand for 2 days." The fire popped sharply. Josie flinched. "The third time." She stopped, staring into the flames. "I prayed for someone, anyone, to look at me like I was a person, not a debt, not ruined goods, not something they owned." She lifted her eyes to Clayton. He did not look away. He did not blink. He simply breathed, letting the weight of her words settle between them. Josie's hands shook as she adjusted Micah on her lap. Dried blood cracked on her knuckles. Clayton stood slowly and crossed the clearing. Josie stiffened, unsure of what he meant to do, but he kneeled beside her instead. Gently, he took her left hand, turning it palm up. Her skin was scraped raw, the welt on her wrist swelling from where Reddick had dragged her earlier. Clayton reached into his coat, pulled out the same cloth he had used the night before in the saloon. Carefully, without a word, he tore it into a long strip and wrapped it around her hand, binding the wound with slow, patient movements. Josie watched him, breath unsteady. He tied the cloth firmly, but gently enough that she did not wince. No grand gesture, no promise, just quiet care. When he finished, she whispered, voice cracking. "I do not know if I can trust you." Clayton sat back on his heels. The firelight carved sharp lines across his face, but his voice was steady. "You do not have to trust me forever," he said. "Just trust me through tonight." Josie held his gaze, searching for something. Danger, pity, deception. She found none. "Tomorrow," Clayton continued, "we will figure out the rest." Josie lowered her eyes, blinking hard. "I want to try," she whispered. Clayton nodded once. The forest remained cold. The wolves still howled, but for the first time, the darkness did not feel quite so endless. Word traveled fast on the frontier, faster than horses, faster than telegrams. By the morning of the second day, every tavern, every train stop, and every crooked lawman within 50 miles had heard the same thing. Wanted, Josie Palmer, and the man who stole her. Reward, dead or alive. Reddick's words were plain. "I want my property back, and the son of a bitch who took her." Money spoke louder than justice. It always had. Within hours, a group of bounty hunters rode out from Iron Ridge. 6 men, 1 tracker, 1 killer. And at the front of the pack, Dale McQuaid. He wore a weather-worn duster and a smirk that had seen too much and cared too little. Years ago, he and Clayton had ridden together through deserts and border towns, chasing bandits and blood money. But Clayton had changed. Dale hadn't. And this time, Dale was chasing him. Clayton felt the noose tightening. They changed direction 3 times, moved mostly at night, crossed a shallow river twice to throw off the scent. He led Josie and Micah through ravines and dry creek beds, doubling back across their own tracks and covering prints with pine branches. Still, something lingered in the air. An unease, like a predator was just out of sight. By the 3rd night, they reached a narrow valley littered with boulders and twisted trees. Clayton scanned the horizon, but his gut had already spoken. He felt the bullet before he heard the shot. Pain exploded through his left shoulder, and he fell from the saddle, hitting the ground with a thud that knocked the breath from his lungs. Josie screamed. Clayton rolled, one hand clutching his bleeding shoulder, the other reaching for his gun. But it was too far, kicked loose in the fall. From behind a dead tree, a voice echoed. "Thought I'd never catch you, Reeve." Dale stepped forward, revolver raised, grin sharp beneath his hat brim. Josie knelt beside Clayton, shaking, her hands already slick with his blood. Dale aimed. "This is the part where I collect, old friend." Micah cowered behind a rock, frozen. Josie looked at Clayton. His eyes were calm, despite the pain. He shook his head. "Don't." But her hand was already moving. She reached for his gun, her fingers fumbling with the weight, the cold steel foreign in her palm. She rose, trembling, both hands wrapped around the grip. Her breath hitched. She had never fired a gun, never pointed one. Dale saw it. "You think you can shoot me, sweetheart?" he scoffed. "Go on, try. Let's see what you're made of." Clayton's voice came low, strained. "Do not let your hand take that weight unless you are ready to carry it forever." Josie's heart pounded in her throat. Micah whimpered her name. She aimed. Dale took one step forward. A single shot cracked through the night. Dale staggered back with a scream, the gun flying from his hand as the bullet tore through his shoulder. He collapsed beside his horse, clutching the wound. Josie stood frozen, the pistol smoking in her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. Clayton exhaled, then grimaced as the pain surged. She dropped the gun and ran to him. Behind them, Dale groaned, trying to crawl toward his weapon. Clayton sat up slowly, cradling his bleeding arm, and called out, "Leave it, Dale." Dale froze. Clayton picked up his own gun, aimed it, but not to shoot. "I won't finish you," he said. "I owe you once. Now it's paid." Dale sneered. "You going to let me go?" "I am. But if you come after us again..." Clayton cocked the hammer. "I will not aim for the hand next time." They locked eyes. Dale spat blood, nodded once, then crawled to his horse and mounted with one hand. He rode off into the trees, vanishing into the dark like a bad memory finally fading. Josie pressed her hand to Clayton's wound. "You are losing too much blood." He leaned into her touch, breath shallow. "You saved me," he murmured. She shook her head. "I saved Micah." He gave a soft, painful smile. "Same thing." Morning Hollow sat nestled between low hills and cottonwood trees, a small town where the wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers instead of gunpowder and ash. It was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions, where men tipped their hats and women smiled as they passed you on the road. Clayton had found it after weeks of riding south, his arm still stiff from the wound. The town needed a blacksmith, and he knew his way around iron and wood. He bought a small patch of land on the edge of the valley, where the grass grew thick and the soil held warmth. He built a fence. He raised a barn with help from a farmer who lived up the hill. He planted rows of beans and squash and corn. Josie kept her head low at first. She wore plain dresses and worked in silence. But when she brought a batch of apple biscuits to the town's market, the women took notice. By the second week, she had regular customers. By the third, they asked for her by name. Micah went to school. On his first day, he carried a slate and a piece of chalk, both tied in a cloth Josie had sewn from an old apron. He came home wide-eyed, talking about books and maps, and how the teacher let him ring the bell. His laugh came easier now. His nightmares faded. For a while, peace was a thing they did not speak of, as if naming it might make it disappear. Then one morning, as Clayton hammered a horseshoe in the shop, a stranger passed through town and spoke a name he had hoped never to hear again. "Reddick?" Clayton asked. The man nodded. "Dead. Happened in Elk Ridge 2 nights ago. Got drunk, laid hands on the wrong councilman's daughter, shot twice in the gut." Clayton said nothing for a moment, just stared at the nails in his hand. "Anyone mourn him?" he asked quietly. The stranger snorted. "Not even the undertaker." Clayton nodded once and went back to his work. That night, he told Josie. She stood still for a long time, her eyes unreadable. "Does it feel like justice?" she asked. Clayton shook his head. "Justice would have come sooner." Josie gave a sad smile. "Justice came the day we left." The fire crackled low in the hearth. The house they had built was small, but warm. Micah sat on the floor, drawing horses with charcoal on scrap wood. The smell of stew hung in the air, and the windows breathed soft golden light into the quiet. Micah stood up and walked to the mantel above the fireplace. In his hands, he held a piece of cloth, torn, worn, faded with old blood. The same cloth Clayton had used to wrap his mother's hand. Micah reached up and hung it carefully on a nail, just above the family's only photograph, a crude sketch of the 3 of them, drawn by a peddler who passed through in the spring. Josie turned, saw what he was doing, and covered her mouth. Her eyes filled. Clayton walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. No words, just the warmth of presence. Micah looked up at the cloth, then turned to them. "I think this is home now," he whispered. Neither Josie nor Clayton answered. They did not have to. The valley bloomed like a promise kept. Wildflowers spilled across the meadows, yellow and violet and white, swaying in the wind like dancers who had forgotten sorrow. The air was sweet, with new grass and wood smoke, and the days stretched long beneath the open sky. Micah ran barefoot through the yard, chasing shadows and calling out the names of the horses, just as Clayton had taught him. "That's Redtail. And that's Dusty. And the brown one, he's mine." His laughter echoed against the barn. Inside the cabin, Josie placed a jar of wildflowers on the kitchen table. She arranged each stem with care, humming softly. Her hands moved with grace, her eyes soft and clear. The home around her smelled of cinnamon and wood, of flower and pine sap. A home built not just with nails and boards, but with healing. Clayton worked out back, fixing the roof of the stable. His sleeves were rolled, sweat lining his brow. He moved with the same quiet steadiness he always had, but his eyes no longer looked past the horizon. They stayed here now, watching the life he had once thought he would never deserve. In the weeks since they'd come to Morning Hollow, something had settled in his chest. Something like peace. At the market, Josie sold her bread and jam. A kind man at the general store once asked if she'd ever consider taking supper with him. She smiled, warm but firm. "I already have someone who listens." Clayton, meanwhile, had entered a local saddle competition. Quietly, reluctantly, his hand-stitched leatherwork earned second prize and a small purse. He brought it home, dropped the coins on the table, and said, "For the boys' books." Josie kissed his cheek. Later that month, a letter arrived in handwriting Josie hadn't seen in years. It came from Elk Ridge. Inside was a single page. "I do not know if you lived," it said, "but if you did, I hope you know. We are free now. He is gone. We are finally free." Josie folded the letter carefully and placed it in a carved drawer. She touched it once more before closing it. The past was still there, but it no longer ruled her. That night, the three of them sat by the fire. Josie told a story about a brave fox and a clever bird. Micah fell asleep in Clayton's arms, his breath even and light, fingers curled around the old cloth bandage that had once wrapped his mother's wounds. The firelight painted gold across the walls. Clayton looked down at Josie, her face lit by the soft flicker. "Do you regret it?" he asked gently. "Trusting me that night?" She didn't speak at first. Then she turned, eyes shining, and said, "If you hadn't nodded that night, I would not be alive to answer this question." He reached across and took her hand. The fire cracked. The wind brushed the window. Peace held them all in place. And then, a voice, older now, wiser, cut gently through the night. Micah groaned, remembering. "I did not always know what home was. But one day, a man walked into my life and looked at my mother, not like a debt to be paid, not like a broken thing. He never promised me anything. He never raised his voice. He never told me how to be a man, but he let my mother live, and because of that, I had a life." At the gate of the little ranch, Clayton carved into the wooden post with the edge of his knife, "Micah, Josie, C. Reeve, family." The door to the cabin closed softly behind them. Inside, the hearth still glowed. Outside, spring moved across the land, and the wind danced on the high plain. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. For more unforgettable tales of love, courage, and second chances on the American frontier, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We bring you powerful stories where the past still breathes, and love rises from dust and danger. Tap the bell to never miss a new story, because out here, where bullets missed but hearts didn't, every tale deserves to be remembered. Thanks for riding with us. See you in the next story, partner.